Hello, greatly valued Circle players. I have a list, and I got to thinking first that it must be annoying to have the author of the game carping away constantly. And I know that in the video you mentioned me a couple of times. See, we got that one right and stuff, which is great. I appreciate it. It's funny. But I also don't want to have it be, an underlying antagonistic thing, which we make jokes about to soften up or try to mitigate. Keep the jokes, but I don't want there to be like this underlying condition that needs them. Well, also, there's the issue of I say X and someone says, well, yes, but, we're playing our characters, and that's fine. I didn't criticize that, and I'm not going to criticize it. In fact, I'll start with the sweetness and talk about some of the role-playing that was just incredibly warming to watch, both in general as a fellow role-player and also as someone knowing the text from which you're working. The first, most obvious thing about that is the social rank issue, the way perceptions were brought in based on people's social ranks. People see different things due to that in this game, and that's really clear. But it was not just from the game master. It was also, as people talked about at the end of the session, sort of an internalization of how this particular person expresses the social rank through their own lens. So instead of saying, well, I'm a peasant and peasants do this, and I'll just sort of deliver peasantness as an assigned task, instead it's saying, well, this is this person with that key event, and we've actually seen that person in play before, and I may have played them before, or you may have played them before, and now we see that person now. And so with that lens, the peasant background or the freeman background or whatever background is expressed in a way that illuminates it all. And I just thought that was fantastic from everybody, and it made the setting just jump forward. There are terminological quibbles possible. I know where they come from, and I know there's nothing really to be done about them, in case you're interested. And I think there was some self-correcting along the way too, the sort of reflexive use of the word nobles, and then kind of perhaps a self-correction to gentry, because the difference is pretty strong. One of the important points about that, I guess, that could help, or if you care, is the concept of wealth inequality. In the Crescent Lands and in Iron Age culture, wealth inequality may be keenly felt, but it is nothing like it would become under feudalism. In fact, there's no comparison at all. So that might be part of it. The gentry are privileged partly through birth and other aspects of local history, but the nature of the privilege would make a modern person, say, wait a minute, that? And it doesn't carry with it the constant threat of socialized violence in an institutional way that it would under feudalism. Well, anyway, that aside, that is just a term, I suppose, but I thought that might be interesting to consider. A similar term, soldiers, which perhaps is fine in terms of just a quick reference. A bunch of people operating in a fairly organized way with weapons, and they have fought together before, and they do identify with a particular set of leaders. But again, the sort of the concept of, well, these guys are the soldiers and they operate as, a military unit. As a generic term, no big deal. Food for thought retroactively, which is all I'm shooting for here, is just to say, okay, well, what do we mean when they're these guys, people like this, but they're not soldiers? What does that mean? Useful as a concept. Well, what then? I will look at my notes again. Right. I guess it's sort of the same concept, but it's a little bit more of an observation of the two things together. One is that, in particular, talking about the sort of charismatic and romantic of the knights, of the player characters. And Anthony put it just exactly right, with this character has a narrative running in their head. That's actually from the text, the notion that this person has a tendency to see situations as a story unfolding and wants the story to feature them in a particular way and wants the themes of the story to go a certain way. And, it's kind of a almost negative, or at least a little disturbing version of the term romantic. So having played that to perfection, it also means that these next observations are actually justifiable, or more so than they would be just taken straight, no chaser, as what we do here. The notion that other Circle Knights would look at this behavior and kind of go, what? Makes a lot more sense than to say, well, this is what we do, so this is how I acted. So if you think of that character as actually being a little weird, or at least bent in a particular psychological way, it makes a lot more sense when he talks about penitence, when he talks about what, the term taking responsibility, a lot of things like that, which, again, not to pull the historical cord or hit the red button, but rather to say is very evocative of much later literary versions of feudalism. So 19th century versions of 14th century feudalism in Europe are all about talk like that. And a lot of the high-level church rhetoric of that time as well was just couldn't shut up about that kind of stuff. And so rather than carp and say, hey, what's that doing in my crescent land? Instead, it's more a matter of saying, oh, yeah, that particular character's really got some investment in this fairy tale stuff. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, there is a little other language in there that goes with that. And something like, well, a heartfelt apology would do it. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, right. Like, any kind of herbaja effect, or, gives a what's that got to do with the price of wine in Spain? So it was kind of cool, that's another example of this kind of speech that made perfectly good sense to the guy saying it at the time. He's already got his whole thing going. And, the reality of it all has nothing to do with it. And it took me a little bit to realize that's what was going on. I was saying, wait a minute, what is this guy's traits? Who is this character? And then I was going, oh, right, he's that guy. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Well, what else do I have in here? Well, all sorts of things that others have commented on in the comments to the videos and things, which have to do with culture and how easy it is for a rather small group of people to consider themselves us, our place. I mean, it's kind of like global nationalist comparisons can be pretty much similar to, my side of the hill and these goats versus, over there on your wretched side of the hill and those spavined goats you seem to persist in, messing with us with. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a cool observation. And I really liked the idea too, as one of you put it, that the characters are really sort of discovering what you might think of as activism, or at least reform, without knowing what it is, or rather not having a text to read from about it and then to take that role, but instead they're just doing it, and it is painfully clear to all of us as players that they are groping their way through all the issues you would expect and running into various contradictions. You say things like, well, wait a minute, we're all one people here. We're the Iron Folk. And the guy's like, no, you're on that side of the hill. And so it's kind of cool. We have several layers, right? We've got the whole Crescent Lands and the culture that I call the Iron Folk. We've got the various regions, Famberga and so on. And those aren't really, demarcated. No one ever drew a line on a proper map. They don't even have the tools for that. They use other kinds of maps, not these representational one that you can draw a border on. And then you have these micro spots or these micro cultures that are very much about what exactly the seasons are like here, and very much about how the discernible or remembered genealogies have developed here. And then that's good enough. That's enough for a people. And, it's not just a family. There's lots and lots of, different people and different families, different genealogies, different overlapping things. But the history is known and taken into account socially. Someone walks in, they don't know any of that. You're kind of like, well, you're just not one of us. So I really like the layering of all of that. Now, hopefully I've laid down enough appreciation, sweetness, and love, and we can talk about what I hope to express as what I would have done or what I would do when playing, as opposed to what you should have done. I have zero hope that distinction will actually be felt, but let's see. We have, of course, we've got the fight with Feist the Witch, which was a one-shot, one-kill. At first, it looked as though the group was going to barrel into calculating damage from Anthony's offense roll, just standing by itself, no defense from the witch at all. And I was kind of like, oh no, they're going to just cut her in half and then call it a win. And then no, the dialogue self-corrected and wait, what about her defense? And so okay, wait, got that going. Then the full defense option she had taken, which should have doubled her quickness and added to the roll, was just her quickness. So she had less of a total than she would have. I haven't gone back and counted on my fingers, but Anthony's insane offense total may still have been enough to take her down, or at least put one of her attributes down. And then there's rules about what to do when you have one at 0 and one not. Might actually have been more, because as I recall, she was actually coming in first. So maybe she had a really high quickness. If she did, and that was doubled, then maybe his roll might not have done a whole hell of a lot. There's also another issue, which is that there was time for her to pronounce an oath first. And if she had tossed in a black oath right then and got a fourth die to roll, because she had the advantage, right? She's already rolling 3 dice. I think she rolled under par on the 3 dice that she did roll. So she rolled under par. She didn't get her doubled quickness. And if, on the other hand, she had the 3 dice, just leaving the roll where it is even, if she had been even just lucky enough to get over the hump of the bell curve, just saying. And if she had her double quickness, and if you had an additional die due to an oath, then things may well have proceeded more along the lines of what people were thinking about when they first walked up, and the build up to it was exceptional and accurate. Well, anyway, there's that. Continue being a jerk. I was a little puzzled about the haunt. The haunt having, slaked its fury on a victim, seemed apparently to be vulnerable to attack, which again kind of puzzled me. I was kind of like, blink, wait a minute, it's insubstantial now. I mean, what's going on with that? But who knows? I mean, it was a call in the moment. People just kept playing on through, and that was fine. Maybe that's just how it got played. But yeah, again, I was kind of going, another, if not like just a full bork, and just said, oh, well, we just totally, misplayed and just handed them, total victory. Not going that far, but again, if the momentary interpretation of the rules of the table leans any way, it does tend to lean in that direction. Well, that's enough personal name calling as I'll get to, because I don't want to do that. What have we next? Anything? Right. Before I kind of realized that Anthony's character was running a saga in his head, almost more than anything else. That I wrote down a note. Like, wait, are we playing paladins? What is this? But as I said, that wasn't really the case, and was quite brilliant as it did ultimately play out. The tripping of the tripwire in that regard, which came directly from all of his gaudy rhetoric about penitence and, you're a gentry and all kinds of stuff like that. All his gaudy rhetoric, is basically the community as a whole, because of the tripwire mechanic, the community as a whole just kind of said, the fuck, came to kill. That's kind of cool. Yes, that was the whole thing in terms of mechanical cause and effect along those ways. The beautiful use of the charm rolls to set context for interactions going forward. There are rules for subsequent charm rolls, but they didn't necessarily apply. In fact, I kind of agree that they didn't. And so therefore it made perfectly good sense to just play through the current struggle in the context of those initial charm rolls, and that's what you get. So it's fascinating to think about how things might have gone differently, and that is precisely part of the point, that these scenarios don't play through in a predictable way. And I quite like how it went. For that ending part was just like, that makes sense.